Okay, so today we're diving into something called the Any-3 communication method. Now, it was built for a pretty specific reason, but honestly, the way it's put together gives us some really cool insights into how you can guide any conversation with a clear purpose. So, yeah, let's get into it.
You know that feeling, right? We've all had it. You've got something you really truly believe in. Maybe it's a core value, a personal philosophy, or your faith, and you want to share it. But how? How do you even bring it up without it feeling super awkward? It's a tough one.
Yeah, because on one hand, you've got that approach that's just forced, kind of preachy, and that just makes people put up a wall, you know? But what we're all really aiming for is something that feels natural, that's built on a real relationship. And that gap between the two, that's the exact problem this Any-3 method tries to fix.
So that's the big challenge, right? How do you start these deep conversations in a way that feels spontaneous, but is still effective? You want it to flow naturally, not sound like you're reading from a script.
And that's where the Any-3 method comes in. It's presented as this system that helps make these conversations feel totally off the cuff and spontaneous, even though, and this is the interesting part, there's a really clear structure hiding just underneath the surface. All right, so what is this thing? Well, according to the source material, it's basically a method to help Christians talk about their faith more naturally. The name Any-3 is pretty clever. It comes from the idea of being ready to talk with anyone, anywhere, at any time. And the big thing they emphasize is that it's supposed to be about building relationships first, not just, preaching at people.
Okay, so how does it actually work in practice? This isn't just some vague advice. Nope, it's a very intentional 5-step framework. It's like a roadmap for a conversation, designed to take you from hello all the way to a very specific conclusion.
And here they are, the 5 steps. It's a pretty clear path. First, you get connected. Pretty simple. Just start a friendly chat. Then, get to God, where you steer the conversation towards spiritual things. Step 3 is get to lostness, which in this framework means helping the other person see a spiritual need. After that, step 4, you get to the gospel and share the core message. And the whole thing wraps up with step 5, get to a decision, where you ask for a response. Let's see what that looks like in a real-world example.
So that first step, get connected, it can be way more direct than you might think. In the sample conversation from the source material, one guy, Derek, just straight up asks the other, Hassan, hey, do you have some time for a discussion about religion? Wow, no beating around the bush there. That's the gateway for the whole conversation.
And check out how fast this thing escalates. In one move, Derek pivots to this super personal question about sins being forgiven. That one question does a ton of heavy lifting. It covers steps 2 and 3. It gets the conversation to God and then immediately to lostness by creating this moment of uncertainty.
So right after Hassan says he's not sure, Derek jumps in with step 4, get to the gospel. And notice what he does. He doesn't argue or debate. He just makes a really direct statement about what he believes. This is the part where the core message is delivered, and it sets up the final step perfectly.
Okay, so we've seen the how, the step-by-step process. But that kind of makes you wonder about the why, right? Like, where did they get this specific 5-step model? Turns out they didn't just pull it out of thin air. It's actually based on a very famous story from the Bible.
And this is it, the story they use as the blueprint. The entire Any-3 method is basically a breakdown of the conversation Jesus has with a Samaritan woman at a well. The source material treats this one interaction as the ultimate template for how these conversations should go. And you can see here how they map their 5 steps directly onto that story. So according to their analysis, Jesus first connects by asking for a drink of water. Then he transitions to God by talking about living water. He gets to lostness by bringing up her personal life, making her aware of a need. Then he presents his message. And finally, the whole thing leads to a decision, where she runs off to tell everyone. See? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All the steps are right there in the story. Okay, so let's step back from the specific religious goal for a second. What can we learn from this approach about communication in general? Because underneath it all, the Any-3 system is really built on some fundamental ideas about how to talk to people about, well, any important topic, really. The source material says it all comes down to these 3 words. The conversation has to be intentional. Not necessarily scripted, but you know where you're going. It also has to be informal. The whole point is to have a relaxed chat, not a stuffy presentation. And maybe most importantly, it's got to be interactive. This is absolutely not a one-way speech. It has to be a real conversation. And to really hammer home that interactive point, the source material brings up this really cool little detail. In that story at the well, they counted it up. Jesus spoke 7 times, and the woman spoke 6 times. It was almost perfectly balanced. It was a real back and forth. And that just drives home the point, doesn't it? A truly connecting conversation is a dialogue, never a monologue.
So that kind of leaves us with a big question to think about. This Any-3 method offers one very specific, very structured way to guide a conversation toward a goal. But it makes you think, in all the important conversations we have, what's the secret ingredient? What's that one thing that turns a simple exchange of words into a moment where you actually truly connect with another person?